Hello and welcome to Whispers Reddit. We're thrilled to have you join our cozy corner where we dive into the most intriguing, heartwarming, and sometimes mysterious stories from Reddit. Whether you're here to unwind, get inspired, or simply enjoy a good story, you've come to the right place. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a whisper. Grab a comfortable seat, relax, and let's embark on this storytelling journey together. Thank you for being part of our community. Let's get started. He had an affair with his son's long-term girlfriend, his son's first love, and he told his son about it as if it were nothing out of the ordinary. Later he shared the story at work, calling his son a bit dramatic for being upset, and we watched his life fall apart as both of his children cut him off completely. He received an email from his older daughter informing him that he was now a grandfather, but there were no pictures or other correspondence, and it was shocking. During the summer, when we were both in college, I had a girlfriend visit me for 4 days at my grandmother's house, which was packed with family. Immediately after she arrived, we went for a walk, and she broke up with me. I was shocked, wondering what I was supposed to do with her for 4 days around my family. I tried everything to get her to change her mind or at least give me an explanation, but it was so abrupt that she finally admitted that she sat next to me on the way to my house. When she broke up with me again, I simply said, "Yeah, fine." I think she wanted me to fight for her again for a few months after she seemed a little obsessed with me, but I was done. Story 3. There was a decomposing dead cat stuck between a fence and a wall. The woman apparently told her to trust her feelings, which is why she never gave me a real reason. I had a great weekend before she changed her mind. When physical education was our first class at my school, we had to wait in front of the gym until someone got the keys. One day, my friend Jason went to get the keys, leaving his bag behind. The class bully Toby used 2 sticks to pick up the dead cat, opened Jason's bag, and stuffed it inside. Jason didn't realize until we were in the locker room. When he opened his bag, he saw the dead cat scream and dropped the bag, which fell apart in a soupy mess of rotten inside crawling with maggots splashed. My aunt and uncle are wealthy farmers who have spent decades expanding their business for their children to run and eventually inherit. One of their major expansions was going from simply raising beef cattle to handling the butchering and selling of the meat themselves. They built a stunning $1 million butcher shop, sent my cousin's husband to butcher school to get certified, and managed the locker room. Class was immediately cancelled due to the mess on the floor, and a cleaning company had to come in to disinfect the locker room. Story 4. Things took a turn a few years later when my aunt and uncle began receiving complaints about how the business was being run. They assumed it was a motivation issue and offered my cousin's husband a raise, even though he and my cousin already earned enough to afford $1 million. My cousin handled the bookkeeping, but neither of them did anything to earn this opportunity. They were essentially handed a golden ticket. His response, however, raised red flags, as he sarcastically claimed he already made. After hours, my aunt and uncle looked over the bookkeeping records and found some serious irregularities. When the husband learned of this, he stormed over to their house screaming in rage. Eventually, it was discovered that he and my cousin had manipulated the books to embezzle over $1 million. Although they were fired from the family business, they were not prosecuted and even received a sizable buyout. Since then, they have had little contact with the family. Story 5. I was casually dating a woman who started pressuring me for early in the relationship. After several months of not having sex, I finally decided to go for it. The plan was to have dinner at her place and spend the night after dinner and a few bottles of wine. However, after dinner and a few bottles of wine, things heated up, and then, oh no, the condom broke. They're grandchildren, but have been repeatedly rejected. It's mind-blowing that they were handed everything and still threw it all away. They would have inherited the business, but greed overcame them. She said, "Don't worry, I'm on the pill," and I said, "Okay, show me." However, she couldn't or wouldn't produce the pills or a prescription, so I checked her trash and discovered a condom wrapper with a pinhole in it. When I confronted her, she confessed to poking holes in the condoms and said that she had a daughter who tragically committed suicide and felt that God owed her another child, which marked the end of the relationship. Fast forward 20 years, and I now have a son, whom I won custody of when he. Story 6. Back in the day, a kid I knew was on Xanax and decided to steal one of his neighbor's SUVs. We lived in the type of southern neighborhood where people would leave their keys in their cars, so this wasn't as difficult as it sounds. He's currently an engineering student at the University of Utah, and his mother owes me $1,600,000 in unpaid child support, but I'll never see a dime of it, and I've learned that family courts don't favor men regardless of the circumstances. Offered to give me a ride, but I wasn't thinking about it, so I accepted it. His family had several cars, so I assumed it was one of theirs. When I asked whose car it was, he admitted that he had stolen it. I was shocked, tried not to touch anything, and got out. About half an hour later, I heard police sirens and fire trucks down the road, so we called him and his mother, but nobody knew where he was. The following day, We finally got in contact after dropping me off. I can't even begin to imagine what his neighbors told their insurance company about Seven, a close friend of my mother's who was having an affair with a married man named Patrick. Patrick's wife, Caroline, was mentally unstable and suffered from depression as a result of Patrick's abusive behavior and constant infidelity despite his history as a serial cheater. He had gone off-road in the SUV and left it parked on train tracks, where a train struck it, causing a fire and complete chaos. He hid out in the woods that night to avoid being discovered. Thought it was true love and was certain that they would both divorce their spouses and be with Patrick. However, they were not in a rush to formally announce their relationship because Patrick and Maureen were both filthy people who enjoyed torturing Caroline. Patrick would gaslit her all the time, and Maureen would hover around their lives just enough to be noticed but not caught, which fueled Caroline's paranoia because of her past mental health issues. Had persuaded one that he had changed, which left Caroline looking insane. This psychological suffering persisted for more than a year. One night, Maureen called my mother in shock and said that Caroline had committed suicide. My mother hurried to her side, expecting to find her crying or feeling guilty, but instead she found Maureen laughing about it and eagerly awaiting Patrick's visit. My mother, who isn't exactly a saint herself, finally had enough and confronted Maureen before departing in disgust. In the months that followed, Maureen divorced her husband and moved in with Patrick. She even registered the house they purchased in her name. Naturally, Patrick started cheating on her, ghosted her, and eventually left. Maureen's teenage sons initially remained in contact, but when he started turning her against her younger son, both of them moved in with their father and cut her off. She had meticulously planned the timing to keep her kids from finding her, but her teenage daughter unexpectedly came home early and found her body. I cannot muster any sympathy for her story because, although Patrick's sociopathic manipulation is undeniable, Maureen's behavior throughout was equally reprehensible. She allowed Patrick to abuse her and celebrated the death of another woman. In the end, her suffering was a direct result of her own actions. Story 8. When my nephew was 6 months old, he is now 11 years old and thriving, and like most kids his age, he had a SIDS episode in which he stopped breathing and the only reason he lived was because my mother constantly checked on him while watching him. She and my brother were able to bring him back to life, and they took him to the hospital. Naturally, my mother was devastated to learn that her first grandchild was going blue. She called her sister for emotional support, and her sister's response was, "You just need to get Satan out of your life." That was the last straw for years. I had told my mother that her family was emotionally and mentally abusive, but she always dismissed it. Story 9. A 21-year-old co-worker of mine who was only a year or two younger than me battled severe depression, but he masked it with a dark sense of humor most of the time. His jokes about killing himself seemed like edgy humor, not something to take seriously, and she finally believed me enough to cut them off completely. Even now, after my mom's death, those same relatives have the audacity to act as though they don't know why she stopped talking to them. When he realized the relationship was over, he called her parents and begged them to join the call. When the mother answered, he blamed both her and her parents for his deteriorating mental health, ending the call with the chilling final words, "I hope this scars you all forever," before shooting himself in the head while still on the line. He was hurting his only anchor, his girlfriend, but she wanted to end it because her parents didn't approve of him. Story 10. A woman I met in rehab was the end-of-life caretaker for her aunt who had terminal cancer. She was also a drug addict, so she stole her aunt's pain medication. Wealthy but emotionally distant parents had neglected him for years, giving him money but leaving him alone for extended periods of time, leaving him alone and unsupported. His family was ashamed of his actions and refused to write an obituary or hold a funeral. It was haunting to watch someone who had been a part of our everyday lives just vanish. Falsely told everyone that her aunt didn't want visitors or to be transferred to hospice care, she died alone and in excruciating pain, and this woman could keep getting high. Meanwhile, another man was in rehab awaiting trial for raping and assaulting a woman. His lawyer managed to get him into rehab rather than jail by using his veteran status. Sadly, the victim committed suicide before the trial started, so all charges were dropped. The man returned from court, thanking God for giving him another chance at life and boasting that I work for a gardening company that sees workers come and go, and one guy named Mike, yes, that's his real name, built a relationship with a customer named Wilfred, who is 90 years old and completely blind from World War II. Wilfred had an old BMW in his garage that he treasured despite the fact that it hadn't moved in decades. He had learned not to leave marks the next time, and other men in the program would openly discuss how to commit similar crimes and get away with them. It was utterly disgusting. When they were younger, Mike persuaded Wilfred to allow him to take the car home to fix it up, promising to bring it back once it was restored. Wilfred even agreed to pay Mike a sizable amount for his work, but instead, Mike drove the car straight to a scrapyard and sold it for scrap value. Every time Wilfred inquired about the car, Mike lied to him, keeping him in his job. This was one of the most heinous acts I've ever seen, stealing from a blind elderly man. Story 12. A bartender I knew was. Everyone thought he was a great guy, charming, good with customers, and had a long-term girlfriend who was kind and friendly. One day he lost his phone, and someone found it, tried to identify the owner by looking at photos, and ended up giving it to the police. Rumors began to circulate that he had been charged with statutory rape, but at first everyone assumed it was a misunderstanding that the bartender had been abusing his girlfriend's 6 or 7-year-old daughter. He had proof of the abuse on his phone, including. When the truth came out, his ex-girlfriend moved away with her kids to avoid the attention. The girl's biological father was in prison for assault, but I wouldn't be shocked if he eventually sought revenge. Looking back, I remembered a joke the bartender told me at a trivia night about abusing children. He used child pornography to groom her by convincing her it was normal. He even borrowed my Xbox, saying he wanted to play games with her brother, but it turned out he used it to divert the boy while he abused the girl. Story 13. A man founded a gay nightclub that became successful enough for him to sell shares to investors in hopes of expanding, but nightclubs are a trendy and volatile business. Soon after the club started to fail, several investors demanded their money back, so he murdered 3 of them. He is currently serving a life sentence in New York. I had visited the club a few times while on business in the city, but I'll never forget it now. Although this case has been covered in true crime shows, most admit that the details about the nightclub being gay or the associated toy shop frame it solely as a financial fraud turned murder case. Story 14. My friend was in her final year of university. The FBI later contacted me because my sister, who had invested a small amount in the business, was listed in his address book. She testified during the trial as the murderer had approached friends for his fraudulent schemes. In a state of panic and grief, she dropped everything, bought plane tickets, and flew across the country while attempting to arrange deferred exams. She had excellent grades and had secured a dream internship that was almost certain to lead to an amazing job. However, on the day she had 3 finals back-to-back, her parents staged her younger brother's death in order to determine whether she cared more about her family or her career. One professor who taught 2 of her classes demanded a death certificate, which of course she. Story 15. Some people are resentful when their children have the potential to achieve more than they did in high school. My mom took an early retirement and then mysteriously couldn't find work right after I got my first job. From that point on, I worked to pay our utility bills and even covered full tuition costs. She was unable to provide because her brother was still alive and well, so she couldn't graduate that semester and lost her dream internship. However, she graduated half a year later and found a good job, but it wasn't nearly as great as the one she'd missed out on. Sometimes, when I tried to refuse to pay the rent on a 3-bedroom house, she made me feel bad by saying, "Think of your younger sibling, they need you." She even tried to get me to open a joint checking account with her, which I was glad to refuse. When I went to college, my parents borrowed $1,000 for me, saying it was to keep my sibling from becoming homeless, but when I returned home that summer, they had rented a huge house by a lake with extra bedrooms, so I still felt like I was doing the right thing. My sibling moved out, and my mom was no longer able to use them to control me. She miraculously found 2 jobs, one in retail and one with the USPS, because it was easier for her to take advantage of me. She never paid back the money she took from me, and our relationship has been strained ever since. One year, at the suggestion of a friend, I tried to make amends by going to visit for the holidays. As soon as I put my bag down, my mom responded, "You'd pay $100 to stay in a hotel, so you should pay us to stay here." Story 16. My bipolar alcoholic brother has a long history of beating and choking his girlfriends after our mom passed away. He moved in with my elderly father and refused to leave him out of misplaced loyalty to his son. Despite my brother's violent tendencies getting worse on several occasions, including breaking my dad's finger almost, I've realized that she probably felt trapped by her own religious upbringing where having children was expected, but she targeted me relentlessly, and I'll never fully understand why it was insane. I moved my dad closer to me to ensure his safety after he broke his leg and threw a knife that struck his handle first, leaving a gash in his head. Although no charges were ever brought against him, my brother's arrests and other issues eventually caught up with him, landing him in jail and rehab. My dad now lives in a safe and peaceful environment, but my brother has already begun discussing moving into my dad's old house for free because no one is living there. Story 17. My uncle Aaron is the worst person I know, a complete piece of garbage whose cycle of destruction is so predictable that it's almost a script. He charms women, convinces them that he's changed or that he is some sort of victim, gets them pregnant, and then abandons them after the baby is born. When he's ready to leave, he's always desperate for money, so he targets family. Now, he's a complete degenerate, and everyone has had to move away just to feel safe. It's heartbreaking what my dad went through because he couldn't bring himself to cut ties. He has been in and out of jail his entire life, and I honestly wish he would just stay there every few years. He has stolen my dad's identity, opened credit cards in his name, and even tried to empty his bank account. He once took out a business loan with his first son, stole all the money, and vanished. Sometimes, after the baby is born, he returns to the women, tricking them into having another sexual encounter with him just to twist the knife. Hello, I'm Aaron's kid with so-and-so, and I want to meet my relatives. Who the hell is so-and-so? Oh, you hate Aaron. Yeah, same here, welcome to the family. As far as I know, Aaron has 5 families and 3 sons, all named Aaron Jr., from different mothers. Not a single one of his kids has been raised by him. He's currently missing, but we all know the pattern. He'll reappear soon with some woman who is pregnant or already has a child, claiming he's turned his life around, and trying to scam money from someone Aaron. When I turned 18, social services, my dad, and she finally talked about what she owed. She said, "I'm 18 and I don't have to pay anything." Her dad and stepmother didn't realize I was in the room when she said that I didn't have much love for her before, but after learning that I didn't, she said, I didn't have much love for her before. This wasn't the first time she had harmed me as a child. She had previously let her boyfriend drug and I spent the majority of my childhood fending for myself and my sister. She even forced us to steal from stores to support her. On top of that, she filled my mind with lies, telling me that my dad, who loved us more than anything, hated me and wished I was dead. She has done many terrible things, but these stand out the most. A pile of dog crap has been more productive and loving than she ever was. If I ever told her what he did, she would force me to take cold showers as a form of punishment. To make matters worse, my mother ran an adult foster care home where she preyed on elderly residents who had few or no family members. She convinced some of them to include her in their wills and retirement funds. She killed my father by spiking his morning Mountain Dew with crushed Oxycontin, and she later killed her next partner by shooting him in the head with a shotgun. The accumulated blood caused him to bleed out over a heating vent, necessitating the replacement of the house's ductwork. She hated my baby sister because she was my father's favorite. Out of jealousy, she hired a registered offender as a groundskeeper for her estate, knowing full well his background. She flew him in from Arkansas and gave him a trailer on the property, and over the course of a year, she dropped off my sister, who was only 10 years old, on a regular basis. Many people died under mysterious circumstances after her second stint in prison, but I found boxes of fraudulent paperwork filled with forgeries and lies. My mother destroyed our family by brainwashing my sister into believing she had a special relationship with this predator, who repeatedly raped her. He recorded the abuse on tape, which the police later discovered on his hard drive. After my father's death, she received millions of dollars from life insurance because she was able to avoid charges, having his death ruled suspicious rather than a homicide. Despite killing her next partner and being caught trying to murder again, she was only given short prison sentences because of her wealth allowed her to hire top-tier lawyers, and she even trafficked opiates and scammed welfare and housing programs. She is now married to an evangelical preacher and lives about an hour away from me. I haven't spoken to her in over 10 years, and I never will. My brother is an Unarian Universalist pastor and a community leader in the Midwest, and despite everything, they've turned their suffering into compassion and are changing the world. Story 20. My friend grew up with a single mother and a younger sister named Bella who had a different father. Bella's father dated their mom for a while before they split up because he was a complete jerk. There was this kid at school whose dad was friends with Bella's father, and he started hanging out with my buddy a lot, playing video games at his house and drinking with them. They are my heroes, and for me, sharing this story feels like a necessary catharsis. I know her personally, and she's an incredible mother who does everything for her children as a single parent, and I have a great deal of respect for her. However, about 6 months later, my friend's mom ended up in court because Bella's dad wanted custody. To everyone's surprise, this kid was called in as a character witness, telling the court that my friend's mom was a terrible parent who smoked marijuana constantly and neglected her kids. We all still hang out today, and it's crazy to think how close Bella came to being taken away because of those lying scumbags. Story 21. During my freshman year of college, I occasionally bumped into an older student, probably a sophomore or junior, in my dorm. He did this just to gather information and testify against his mom, which was one of the most disgusting betrayals I've ever witnessed. The good news is that even with that testimony, Bella's dad was such a jerk that the court still granted custody to my buddy's mom. In the middle of the year, there was a fatal stabbing in a dorm building next to mine. The victim was a student, and the perpetrator was apprehended. The following day, when the killer was shown on the news, I was shocked to learn that it was the guy I knew from my dorm. It turned out to be a targeted crime, and the killer knew the victim. It still shook me to my core to know that I had casually interacted with someone capable of murder. Story 22. After my father died, my ex-stepmother spent his entire bank account in a matter of minutes. When we confronted her, she returned the money she hadn't already spent on Amazon purchases, but we froze his accounts. However, there was evidence that she had attempted to withdraw more money later, probably with the intention of overdrafting the account and leaving my sister and I with the debt. We're currently trying to sell his house, which she destroyed before we were able to evict her, and we're still having trouble paying off the. We haven't heard from her in roughly 5 months, but I'm sure she's planning something. Story 23. My wife's 69-year-old mother was having affairs with several men while her husband was dying in the hospital from a brain tumor. She also claimed to be pregnant a week after his death, even though they had been together for more than 10 years without ever having a child. My sister asked for proof, and the ultrasound photo she sent turned out to be a $30 fake from a website with altered details. She was already a very abusive and self-centered person, but her behavior during his illness was completely unacceptable. After his death, she refused to assist in planning the funeral, leaving everything to my wife, who was already grieving and only needed some love and support from her mother. Unless my wife prompted her, and even then we had to drive her during her infrequent visits, she spent the entire time asking how she was supposed to pay the bills when he died while he drifted in and out of consciousness before he died. Story 25. During my senior year of high school in northern Michigan, I lived in a cabin with my now wife near 3 other cabins. My best friend lived in one of them, and one day he broke into all the cabins. Although she never worked a day in her life or helped with household expenses, she now tells everyone how badly her late husband treated her and how he left her destitute. I've always disliked her, but after this I absolutely hate her, and I only tolerate her for my wife's sake. He was picked up in town a few days after the tenants called the police after he stole random items. In the back of the police car, he kicked out the window, got into the driver's seat, and attempted to run over 3 officers. He managed to get away and fled to Georgia, where he met a girl and moved in with her and her aunt. For reasons I will never fully understand, he and his girlfriend killed her aunt by strangling and beating her, then buried her in the backyard. After they returned to Michigan, he was arrested there for his crimes. Story 25. My mother killed my grandfather and stole his estate after persuading his wife of 2 months to have him admitted to the hospital. She lied to the doctor who put him on dialysis, which caused a heart attack, and he died. She then locked his house, sold the business he and I had run together for 18 years for scrap, and used the money recovered from the murder in Georgia during the investigation. He was extradited back to Georgia, where he is currently serving life without parole, while his girlfriend received 15 years. She tried to conceal a brokerage account intended for my daughter by persuading the financial advisor to fabricate its existence, then she tried to transfer the account into her name. Finally, she changed the locks on my house, sold it while my family was still residing there, and called the police on me for breaking in when I attempted to retrieve some belongings. She told the family that there wasn't enough money to pay out the inheritance specified in his will. After years of estrangement, I was able to rebuild my relationship with my father, and things were going well until I asked for assistance paying for $150 in S-L-Monin medication for my anxiety and depression. Since I was still covered by his insurance, he would receive 90% of the cost back, but he said he couldn't afford it unless I persuaded my mom to stop receiving alimony. Shortly after my stepsister asked him for $300 for a tattoo, he gave her the money without hesitation, and I left, never to speak to him again. It wasn't the worst abuse, but his narcissism left him needing therapy for years. His actions tore me apart and still affect me today. Story 27. My sister set up a GoFundMe to help our mom with bills during her chemotherapy treatments for multiple myeloma. She raised $10,000 and had the money directly deposited into her account, then she used it to travel to Atlanta. My 6-year-old son was at school when I told him that if he ever approached my son again, I would have him arrested. I will never acknowledge my sister's existence story because she partied away the remaining funds after realizing what she had done, and my mom pleaded with her to return the money. My sister signed a contract to do so but stopped after 3 months, so my mom gave her another 3 months before filing charges. The family sided with my sister, calling my mom a bad person for having her arrested, and my mom dropped the charges to spare her from being shunned for the rest of her life. In order to frighten his clinging girlfriend, a guy in college devised a cunning plan to stage a fake shooting. He had a friend pretend to be an angry man with a gun, and the shooter used a pump-action air pellet gun in a dorm room, making the sound of gunfire sound realistic. He taped ketchup packets to his chest, which burst when shot, simulating blood, and collapsed on the bed, pretending to be dead. By the time dorm security and the resident assistant arrived, the guy had cleaned up. It's one of the cruelest pranks I've ever heard of. Story 29. One of my friend's younger sisters, a 15-year-old girl, was bullied continuously at school by a group of boys because of her weight and appearance, despite the fact that she was a beautiful and typical teenage girl. The constant bullying drove her to jump in front of a car one night, and she died instantly. The girlfriend changed her clothes and played dumb, saying she was acting crazy. The girlfriend left the next day, completely traumatized. The events that followed were even more horrific. Her bullies went online and set up Facebook groups to make fun of her depression and her suicide. They altered pictures of her face onto dead whales and wrote things like, "Oh no, my friend's sister died," and they even made trolling groups called Cut for Friend's Sister and OMG Get X group banned for bullying friend's sister. The girl's father was furious and devastated, and instead of expressing regret, he sent messages threatening the bullies. Screenshots of his online messages stating, "Look how aggressive he is, no wonder friend's sister killed herself." The family was unable to stop the harassment because there were no laws at the time against this kind of online abuse, and they were unable to identify the person responsible for the accounts. Instead, they had to put up with their daughter's tormentors making fun of them until the bullies got bored and stopped. 10 years have passed since then, and those boys are now in their mid to late 20s, and I sincerely hope the guilt of what they. Story 30. A friend of mine had a Tinder date visit our house a few times, and when I got home late one night, I discovered them talking in the living room with her baby hanging around. Nothing seemed particularly wrong, but something about her felt strange. They went to his room, and she left her baby with me. Fortunately, the baby was asleep, but it was an odd situation. It's the only time I've ever truly wished harm on someone to this day, and it's the worst thing I've ever seen. The reason they didn't hook up was because she made him feel uncomfortable. We didn't hear from her again until a month later. One day, while browsing Facebook, I came across her face in a news article. It revealed that she had left her baby alone at home for 4 days while she went out doing who knows what. The poor baby died of malnutrition and neglect. It was unsettling to consider that I had been in the same room as her and that helpless little boy, even though I don't like kids. Story 31. My girlfriend and I were dating for a while when I got to know her brother, who seemed like a really great guy. I even sort of took him under my wing. My girlfriend always seemed a little off, but I didn't understand why at the time, but eventually she opened up to me about something that had happened in her neglect. I can still clearly picture his face, and it's a memory that's hard to shake. She's in prison now, where she belongs, but the thought of what happened still lingers even years later. One night in high school, when she was a senior and her brother was a freshman, he entered her room at around 2 in the morning after getting intoxicated. I wish I had done more to help her at the time. I told her to go to therapy, and she did, but I can't help but feel like I could have supported her better because I didn't fully understand how big of a deal it was now. And raped her while she was sleeping. She froze, unable to move or fight back. The following day she told her parents, and they said, "No, that didn't happen." I hope she's doing well wherever she is now. At 31, I realized how big and devastating it really was. I still think about it a lot and regret not being a better partner to her during such a traumatic time. Story 32. When my daughters were 1 and 2.5 years old, they were visiting their biological father, whom I hesitated to even call because he was anything but that. I was leaving town with my family when he called me. My dad, a retired police officer, called 911 emergency services and said that my 1-year-old had gotten into my pills and was throwing up blood. He yelled various derogatory names at me over the phone, but he refused to take her to the emergency room. When we got there, I saw that there was no blood on her clothes or the car seat, and she was still wearing the same clothes I had dropped her off at the hospital. The staff changed her into a gown and gave her an unnecessary stomach pump, and I stayed with her while my daughters are now 15 and 17 years old and doing well, and we are far away from that toxic relationship. I'm so glad we got out of it, but it still haunts me how far he was. Family continued without me while we were at the hospital. He called security and made a false claim that I had threatened him. The entire day was a nightmare. I felt horrible for my daughter who went through something traumatic for no reason. He did it all to get even with me, and for reasons I still don't understand, he faced no repercussions. Story 33. I've been suppressing this for a while, but my therapist advised me to share it anonymously to help me process it. My cousin, whom I once thought of as one of my closest friends, is currently serving a 25-year sentence for the involuntary manslaughter of her 7-year-old daughter Elle. Depending on your version of events, your cousin or her boyfriend may have beaten Elle to death. To keep things anonymous, she had a rough childhood with an absent father and a bitter single mother, and she became pregnant. It was difficult to know that Elle was caught in the chaos one spring day when I heard that she had been airlifted to a hospital and was initially unconscious. The story was that she had the flu, but that didn't make sense because a healthy 7-year-old doesn't go into organ transplantation. At 16, she struggled to be a good mother despite family members being willing and able to raise her. Instead, she bounced from one toxic relationship to another, choosing men who allowed her to self-destruction. Failure and die overnight after the truth was revealed. Elle was already on the verge of death when she got to the hospital the day before. She and her boyfriend were living in A's car at the time, and the boyfriend was using drugs while dragging Elle along in their destructive spiral. Elle had been pulled out of school and put through unimaginable conditions after the beating, and she told police that she cried all night and wheezed until the following day when The loss was devastating. I loved Elle as if she were my own child, and losing her in such a violent and senseless way broke my heart. It's terrible to know that someone I once loved like a sister was capable of such cruelty, and that's where she deserves to be, but it doesn't undo the pain she caused. Instead of calling 911, they drove around town, texting friends for advice and stopping for coffee in an attempt to figure out how to cover her tracks. By the time they got to the hospital, it was much too late. If you've read this far, thank you. Hug the kids in your life a little tighter. This experience has permanently altered my perspective on the world. Story 34. My friend's ex was abusive and manipulative. He used her past trauma of being abused by her father when she was 5 years old to control her. I have her consent to share this because he threatened to hurt himself if she ever left him, made her send nude photos even though she didn't feel comfortable, and made her block her friends, including me. Fortunately, He tried grooming her at one point, but I stepped in because she couldn't even handle being touched because of her trauma. He stalked her and once attempted to enter her home, but fortunately I was waiting for her and he failed. After 2 years of fighting to get her away from him, she finally blocked him and got a divorce. He blamed her for everything, made her harm herself, made her paranoid, and even forced her to stop eating to lose weight. Story 35. I went to school with a kid whose dad owned a successful bakery. The dad had a business partner who was secretly stealing money. One night, the situation escalated at the dad's house, and the business partner shot him before turning the gun on himself. The family was devastated, and the mom sold the house for a low price and moved away around the same time my aunt and I were in court. She only stayed with him for so long because her family wasn't supportive and she was desperate for love. I hope that vile person receives the karma he deserves. Despite its dark past, my aunt and uncle turned it into a lovely home with no hauntings as far as I know. Years later, one of my cousin's friends who was studying law enforcement watched a crime scene video in class. It was a walkthrough of a murder scene, and it turned out to be the house my aunt and uncle had purchased. Uncle was house hunting, and they bought that house because it was such a bargain, even though it was a murder house. When they first visited the house, there was still blood everywhere, which is unsettling to consider. When the girl began dating the guy's best and oldest friend a few months into their new relationship, the mother skipped town with the best friend and stopped taking care of her responsibilities, including taking their child to speech therapy lessons. For nearly a year, the father handled everything alone and filed for sole custody, which he won not only because the girl was about 5 or 6 by the time they broke up. Didn't appear to dispute it, but also because her own parents testified in favor of him. The best friend started complaining that no one wanted to see him anymore or invite him anywhere. A few weeks later, the mother reappeared with the best friend to declare they were expecting a child together, utterly ignoring the child she had abandoned. The best friend acts as though she has no idea why everyone is angry with him. This story was meant to highlight the best friend's betrayal, but typing it out makes the mom seem even. Josh, my friend's brother, decided to take 5 acid hits when I was around 16. It hit him hard, so he stripped down to just a t-shirt and his underwear, got into his parents' car, and locked the doors. He became convinced that he was trapped inside and began to panic, determined to get out. He forced the wing window open, scraped and bloodied himself, squeezed through the small opening, and went on to a small grocery store nearby holding what he believed to be a 2-tailed snake he had discovered in a cave turned out to be a purse strap he had picked up somewhere. He boldly entered the store and slammed the snake against the counter, declaring he wanted to exchange it for a pack of Marlboro Reds. The cashier was clearly perplexed and refused, but Josh calmly reached into the front of his underwear, took out $3 and purchased the smokes. He left the store without even noticing us, and we smoked all night at home. Josh kept us occupied while we played video games and smoked weed. He told us about the woman who lived in the bathroom closet and had a hole in her head. He claimed that she came out while he was in there and gave him another pack of smokes in exchange for the 2-tailed snake. We still don't know how he got that second pack of cigarettes. Story 38. I used to live in a rough suburb where crazy things happened all the time. One sunny day, I was outside a corner store smoking weed with some friends and a few other crews. Everyone was drinking or doing other things. When an elderly man arrived with 2 trays of beer, 48 cans, and said he had a problem with his 16-year-old son who was hanging out with us, we listened as he explained that his daughter's boyfriend had been beating her due to some clan or family feud rules. The father was unable to handle the situation himself, so he offered us the beer and an old car from his garden if we would rough him up discreetly. Before any of us could respond, his son yelled, "F sake da." He grabbed the keys and ran toward the house, so we naturally followed to see what would happen. What happened next was complete chaos. The son ran into the house, and we heard shouting, smashing, and banging. He finally came out dragging the boyfriend by his hair, repeatedly kicking him in the face and bashing his head against the house wall. In one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen, he shoved the boyfriend's head under the back wheel and got into the car. Started the engine, kept reversing, and sped off, leaving us all sunburned. The boyfriend managed to survive, but we didn't see the sun again for a while. It turns out that he was arrested on the opposite side of the country shortly after that. Story 39. A man I know brainwashed his wife into traveling to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan while pregnant for humanitarian reasons. He had converted to Islam a few years earlier and had been heavily involved in a. Despite the obvious risks, the new wife was persuaded to join him by his previous wife's family, which included a convicted terrorist serving as their spokesperson for legal issues. Once in Afghanistan, they were abducted by Haqqani terrorists and held captive for 5 years. During this time, the man and his wife had 2 more children, all of whom were being moved between locations until they were eventually rescued by Pakistani special forces. However, when offered transportation by U.S. forces, he declined because the flight would land in the U.S. Instead, he forced his family to wait for Canadian transport back home. At first, everything seemed fine, and he even met the Prime Minister, but everything fell apart when his wife ran away from him, screaming, and told the police how he had mistreated her during their captivity. Back home, she told them how he had threatened to kill her repeatedly, including burning her alive in the shower. His actions before and after captivity make this one of the most unsettling situations I've ever heard of. Story 40. He was the groomsman at a wedding where I was a bridesmaid. After the reception, we were all enjoying ourselves while sitting by a fire. His girlfriend was talking to my husband. She was a little inebriated, but okay. He decided it was time for her to go to bed to get things going more quickly, so he pretended to take whiskey shots with her, but he was actually drinking beer. After 3 shots, she was too inebriated to stay awake, so he gathered friends to help carry her to bed. She kicked and screamed the entire time as he loudly made fun of her for being a lightweight and an embarrassment. The following morning at breakfast, he persisted in making everyone uncomfortable by acting in such a way. My husband and I had a private conversation with her, telling her that his behavior wasn't acceptable and that we were available to help her if she needed it, but the entire incident left us wondering if he treated his long-term girlfriend in such a way in public and how he behaved when they were alone, or worse, when he was single and attempting to pursue other women. Story 41. I worked with a. The shy guy lived with another coworker whose girlfriend was also challenging but not nearly as bad as this girl. The 2 women forced their way into the apartment's dynamic, and within a month, the 4 of them hated each other. The girl who began dating a shy, awkward guy at our workplace was his first girlfriend ever. She was known for being toxic, though, and had already slept with 3 other coworkers, one of whom later turned out to have sexually assaulted a 12-year-old. In the second guy's name, so the shy guy had to leave. His girlfriend insisted that they move into a new apartment in her name because she had a better credit score, so he used his savings to pay the first month's rent and the security deposit. As soon as he sent the money, she texted him to end their relationship. She didn't even come to get her things herself, but instead sent a group of guys she was probably sleeping with to get them. She was just a terrible person in general. Story 42. I made friends with a group of people at a cafe, and it turned out that they were all in town for a friend's wedding in a few days. The bride and groom were gracious enough to invite me, so I went to the reception. One girl, Katie, shared a story that she thought was funny, but it left me horrified. The girl wasn't a student, and I frequently saw her there hanging out with random guys while she was still dating the shy coworker. She seemed to thrive on chaos and manipulation. When she got there, she found that her ex had brought his new girlfriend, Moon, with him. Out of spite, Katie snuck over to Moon's tent and peed on it while Moon was sleeping inside. Everyone at the table burst out laughing, congratulating Katie for her brave move, while I sat there in complete horror. I soon realized I didn't want anything to do with these people, and I never kept in touch. After that. Story 43, my dad, who is Chinese, wanted to make a good impression on my mom's family when they got married. My mom's parents and siblings were planning to open a bar, so my dad generously gave them a sizable portion of his savings to help with their startup costs because he believed in the value of family helping family, which is common in Chinese culture. Despite his financial support and business background, he now helps merge and start companies, but they ignored all of his advice whenever he expressed. The family, who had no idea how to run a business, made poor investments, hired a manager who stole from them, and the business failed, leaving them in significant debt. Instead of taking responsibility, they blamed my dad using racial slurs and claimed that it was his fault for giving them the money because it put too much pressure on them. Years later, I discovered that they spread a rumor to all of my cousins that my dad made his money by being involved with the mafia. One summer, our cousins asked my brother if our dad was involved in the mob. When he said yes, they said, "How else does a Chinese man make money?" Story 44, straight up murder. Jordan, a former friend of mine, was a quiet, shy child who preferred to hang out with others rather than be the center of attention. That all changed when he discovered steroids in toxic gym culture at the age of 19. Within months, he became a raging narcissist who began beating up random people after clubbing and even attacked women who rejected him. 5 years later, Jordan was working in the oil fields and had developed severe drug and alcohol addictions. During a period of layoffs, he persuaded an old high school friend who had been clean from addiction to join him on a drinking bend since it would be their last time. They were traveling to a friend's house when Jordan lost control of his pickup truck at 120 km per hour 75 miles per hour in a 50 km per hour 30 miles per hour zone. He overcorrected on a curve, lost control, and the truck rolled off the road, crashing 100 meters through grass and into a condo building. Came to a stop in someone's living room. Jordan's friend was declared dead at the scene with a blood alcohol level of 0.26, and Jordan survived the crash but passed away 5 days later from his injuries. I hope those 5 days were the most agonizing of his life because the lives he destroyed and the chaos he caused were nothing less than what he deserved. Story 45. Around 124 years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I had a group of friends that included a mix of extremely wealthy people, like wealth on a level I had never seen before, and some well-off but deeply. In this group of friends, there was a woman who was extremely wealthy. Her parents owned a company that everyone knew about, and together they came up with a plan to get married so that her family would give them a huge lump sum as a wedding gift and buy them a house. One of the messed up people was this extremely attractive guy, a 1010, who made every girl swoon. He came from a good middle-class family, but he wasn't rich. This guy was a complete piece of garbage, though, and had no ambition other than to marry a rich girl so he'd never have to work. Story 46. I once went to a party for a newly married hippie couple at a rented house on South Padre Island, and everyone there was tripping on acid or mushrooms except for me. The family delivered on both counts, but one day she came home to discover that he was gone. He had cleaned out their bank account and disappeared, literally taking every dime with him. To this day, no one in that group has seen or heard from him again. The whole thing was mind-blowing and left everyone reeling. I went to check on a guy who was off to himself at the party and was clearly upset and worried. He kept muttering that he was going to hell because he was gay. I tried to reassure him by telling him that religion was a human construct and that being gay wouldn't condemn him. I joked that it's not like you're a serial killer. He gave me a stern look and then confessed something really horrifying. He said he had been diagnosed with full-blown AIDS and chose not to. I told the host what he had shared, but I never got his name and I never saw him again. He had been using Grindr, Craigslist, and ass parties to have unprotected ass with as many men as possible, sometimes 3 in a single day, with the intention of infecting them. He targeted younger men who wanted to infect them early in their lives. He estimated that he had likely spread the virus to nearly 1,000 people across multiple cities. I was shocked. Story 47. During my time in college, I was a part of a trio of friends who had known each other since junior high school. The other two, Mark and Tom, got married to identical twins. Mark started going to parties with me, picking up women, and casually cheating on his wife. His actions disgusted me, so I cut off contact with him. A year later, Tom's wife, Jill, had a major breakdown and admitted that Mark had been raping her for 5 years. Mark would arrive early when Tom wasn't home, attack her, and then casually hang out and drink beer while waiting for Tom to return. When the truth was revealed, the police refused to look into it, saying there wasn't enough evidence. I dug deeper and discovered that Mark had raped one of my ex-girlfriends and tried to attack another, warning me that he was obsessed with me, which was terrifying. It also turned out that Mark had molested Tom's younger sister years prior. Additionally, Mark had threatened to kill her and everyone else if she ever told anyone. I offered to help Tom deal with the situation privately, but he chose to take the high road. Looking back, I'm glad we didn't act, but the lack of justice still haunts me. This is even the worst thing I've experienced, but it's the most direct connection I've had to such evil. Story 48. He declared bankruptcy, left his wife with the bills, and walked away unscathed because there was no legal action. And innocent at first. His family wasn't wealthy, and he was the only provider for them after his father died while he was in college. After the wedding, she started to complain about their living situation, saying she wanted her own house and a car, even though her family wasn't as wealthy as his. One day after an argument, she went to see her parents, shortly after my friend's family called to accuse him of abuse. She lied, saying he beat her and demanded a dowry, and her family threatened to sue him unless he complied with their demands, which included moving close to her sister's house and other irrational requirements. My friend demanded a divorce, and her family then demanded $500K to resolve the matter out of court, knowing that the legal process could take years. He ultimately agreed to pay $200K to avoid the ordeal. Later, He learned that her family had a bad reputation due to rumors that the women had dated multiple wealthy men for financial gain and prostituted themselves. The entire arrangement was a nightmare, taking advantage of everyone financially. It taught him a valuable lesson about thoroughly investigating a potential spouse, especially in an arranged marriage.